phase, you are not burdened by regrets. You don't want your enjoyment of your happy, stable, middle-aged life to be constantly distracted by taunting thoughts of all of the things you could have done before you got a wife and house and kids and career, but never did. I mean, everybody in middle age gets those thoughts to some extent, but you can certainly seek to limit them by being conscious of the freedom you have in your 20s and putting a priority on doing what you can while you can. That could mean anything from spending a month in some exotic foreign country, to starting your own business, to getting a second degree, to trying your hand at being a professional YouTuber. The possibilities are truly endless. I don't know why I said pasta. Now, I know that when you are in your 20s, it is easy to get anxious about stuff like, oh, that will be too expensive, or oh, that'll be a big waste of time. But again, a lot of that anxiety comes from a lack of perspective. It is hard to appreciate this in the moment, but a lot of the risks and sacrifices that you make in your 20s just matter a lot less than the ones you will make later on. And this is just because your time to recover from the mistakes that you make in your 20s is so much longer. I mean, part of the reason why I didn't become a YouTuber till I was in my 30s was because I spent much of my 20s pursuing a career in TV news that didn't wind up going anywhere. And before that, I was an ESL teacher in Japan, and that didn't go anywhere either. The point is, you have a lot of time to experiment and a lot of time to bounce back. This might sound a bit weird, but sometimes I actually feel a bit remorseful that I didn't experience more failure in my 20s. Just because failure is often a proxy for trying, and it is only by being brave enough to try new things and take risks that we gain the kind of insight into the varied experiences of life that help build wisdom in our later years. Which leads me to the next thing I want to talk about, which is ambitiousness. In addition to the nervousness that the bad decisions that we make in our 20s will be a lot more damaging in the long term than they usually wind up being, I think that too many guys in their 20s hold themselves back by dreaming too small. As anyone who has spent any time in the proverbial halls of power will tell you, it is often pretty shocking to observe up close the caliber of people who wind up in charge of stuff, whether that's a big corporation or a government or a university or whatever. It's not that they're morons, it's just that they tend to be kind of underwhelming and ordinary, as opposed to some super talented group of superhumans who exist as a class apart from the rest of us. No, the biggest difference is often just that these people had ambition when it mattered. They chose to put themselves in situations where opportunities presented themselves, whether that meant volunteering their labor, attending public meetings, befriending big shots, stuff like that. As the famous Woody Allen quote puts it, 80% of success is showing up. Being in your 40s increasingly means being the same age as a lot of the people that are running the world. That guy that Trump picked to be his VP is literally just a few days younger than me. And when you find yourself in this situation, it is easy to get a bit resentful and think, why is that guy in charge? He's no better than me. And it's true, he probably isn't any better than you. But he also probably had less self-doubt about himself when it mattered and chose not to be intimidated out of aiming high. And this is true for stuff beyond just work as well. Ambition defines everything from what sort of vacations you take to what sort of people you date. We only pursue the opportunities that we have convinced ourselves we are capable of. The director Nora Ephron has this great quote about having a baby, where she says, "The fact that I did it doesn't mean I'm the sort of person who can do it." And I feel like so much of life is like that. Some people just do things in spite of themselves, while others fret endlessly about not being the sort of person who has a right to do it. But a lot of being the right sort of person is just a matter of self-selection, so don't be so quick to skip over yourself for consideration. Now, in my last video about getting older, I talked a bit about physical decline as something that you become more aware of as you age, and that's definitely true. My doctor is currently telling me that I need to get an MRI because there is a history of heart problems in my family that tend to manifest after age 40, and that's a sort of unsettling thing that now I have to think about for the first time. But that said, having rewatched my old video, I do kind of regret portraying physical decline in overly passive terms. Specifically, this idea that a lot of guys get in much worse shape as they get older and experience a decline in self-esteem as a result. And while that does happen, it doesn't always happen. In fact, as I've gotten older, I have been consistently inspired and impressed by how many guys are able to stay fit and healthy and frankly hot well into their 40s and beyond. But the key term that you hear a lot when it relates to physical fitness in middle age is maintain. Because just as you cannot decline from nothing, you cannot stay fit and healthy from nothing either. What you establish in your 20s is critically important, whether that means the exercise routine you follow, or the muscle that you build, or the diet that you eat, just because that at least gives you much better odds of being able to stay in good shape in the subsequent decades of your life. In my own case, the reason why I think I have been able to stay relatively thin and have high energy and maintain fairly youthful looking hair and skin is because in my 20s, I decided that I was not ever going to drink or smoke or do drugs or even consume caffeine, and that I was going to integrate going for long walks into my daily routine. And because I've managed to stick to all of that over the decades, upholding these decisions has become so deeply integrated into the texture of my daily existence that I don't even think that much about it. I am definitely a big believer in the idea that if you really want to build lasting habits, you have to make them part of your identity. Like telling yourself and others, I don't drink, or I go to the gym, as opposed to, I am not going to drink today, or I am going to go to the gym today, as these unusual deviations from your norm. I also just want to say, I don't think it is wrong to have some degree of pride or even vanity for your looks as part of this motivation. I've seen a lot of young guys tie themselves in knots trying to rationalize why they want to start working out because they feel shame to admit that they just think they would look cooler with bigger muscles. But I can assure you, when you are in your 30s and 40s and you're bigger and stronger than all of your friends because you use that pride to motivate you to maintain your workout regime, you're probably not going to feel too embarrassed about it. All right, now let us talk about opinions and ideas. Yours are going to change over time. I honestly did not think it would happen to me, but it did. I actually have a pretty cringe memory of thinking to myself when I was in my 20s, I have such rock solid principles. I will never change my opinion on anything important. I have it all figured out. But of course, the complete opposite happened. I have changed my mind on all sorts of things because the world around me has changed. In the 40 years that I've been alive, I've seen different politicians come and go, different policies succeed and fail, different ideas fall in and out of fashion. While I like to think that my general disposition has stayed pretty consistent over time, I have definitely gotten more conservative on some issues where I used to be quite liberal, and more liberal on some issues where I used to be very conservative. The world is in a constant state of flux, and it is both sane and reasonable to second guess your prior assumptions in the wake of new evidence. Another favorite quote of mine comes from the famous economist John Maynard Keynes, involving some possibly apocryphal interaction he had with one of his critics. The critic is like, I've been reading your stuff for a long time, Mr. Keynes, and it seems to me that your arguments have been pretty inconsistent over the years. And Keynes replies, when the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do, sir? What this means is that it is probably best to carry yourself with some degree of intellectual modesty in your 20s. Especially these days, you don't want to humiliate your future self by going on the record proclaiming all of these righteous, sweeping conclusions about the world before you've had a chance to see that much of it. Now, I realize that might come off as a little condescending, like an annoyed boomer just trying to get the kids to sit down and shut up. But that's not what I mean. I think it is perfectly fine to have and express opinions in your 20s, but you just got to be aware that there's a very high likelihood that you won't think those things forever. So I would advise picking your intellectual battles carefully. Now that said, it's not like this is a perfectly one-way thing either. While I enjoy it when my younger friends defer to my ability to offer historic context to things like trends or current events, I also like deferring to their ability to see things that are familiar to me